जान साहब, मेरी रिक्वेस्ट ये है कि तुम कुर्सी अपनी इधर ले लो, क्योंकि तुम उठ के जाओगे आओगे जाओगे।
So a very good evening to all our attendees. I can see the numbers are rising fabulously. Welcome, a warm welcome to all of you. And I would like to now invite our President LEIRI, Dr. Anjali Prakash. Ma'am, please could you invite the chairpersons for today and our speakers?
Anjali, you need to unmute.
Ma'am, you please unmute.
Okay, sorry, I'm sorry for that.
Yeah.
On behalf of the Delhi State Chapter of IRIA, it's my proud privilege to invite the speakers for today for this masterclass. The coordinator today is Dr. B.R. Goel, who is Chief of Radiology at Max Super Speciality Hospital, Patparganj. And he is also the Vice President of the Delhi State Chapter. He'll be moderating this session. A warm welcome to the two speakers today for the masterclass, Dr. Marwa and Dr. Kalpana Bansal, and my co-panelists, Dr. Shivani Mehra and Dr. Surabhi. So I'll hand over the stage now to Dr. Goel to moderate this session. Dr. Goel, please. Thank you.
Unmute yourself, Dr. Goel.
Yeah. Very good evening, my friends. Thank you very much, Dr. Anjali Prakash, for kind introduction. My sincere thanks to Dr. Shalini Thapar for giving me this opportunity to coordinate this session. Last but not the least, my big thanks to Team Delhi IRIA for putting constant efforts in organizing the masterclass every weekend. I'm sure this is going to be really helpful to our resident friends. This will be a good platform to upgrade their skill. Today we are going to have a two interesting session. Our first speaker will be Dr. Vineet Marwa, who will be speaking on MR spectroscopy. He's going to make topic very simple. I'm confident if you focus for initial 10-15 minutes, you will understand topic very well. And at the end of a session, I'm sure my resident friend will be able to report these cases comfortably. You know, day-to-day problems like whether it is a tuberculoma, whether it is a neurocytosis, how to differentiate by spectroscopy, whether it is a recurrence of tumor, whether it is a necrosis, how to differentiate. He's going to make things very easy. So, Dr. Vineet Marwa is a principal consultant at Max Hospital, Patparganj, Delhi. He's a great friend and a dynamic personality. We are working together for more than 10 years. Dr. Marwa is an alumni of R&T Medical College, Udaipur. He is having experience of more than 16 years. He is trained in all high-end modality with special interest in neuro and cardiac imaging. He also a postgraduate teacher and has been invited guest speaker in many state-level conferences. He has many awards and publications to his credit. Dr. Marwa, please.
Yeah, hello friends. So first of all, I thank Dr. Anjali and Dr. Shalini ma'am to giving me this opportunity to share my experience about MR spectroscopy with my fellow IRIA members. And I, of course, give thanks to Dr. B.R. Goel sir for giving me a warm welcome and acknowledging me here. And, so now I will be discussing about MR spectroscopy. Right. So we'll start
Dr.
here.
Marwa, please share your slides. Please just go on to the share screen button at the bottom, the green one. Please share your slides.
Yeah, ma'am. Please repeat, ma'am.
Please share your slides, Dr. Marwa. You have to go
Yeah,
to the share screen icon.
Yeah, just a second.
Share the screen, please.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll start, right, ma'am?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. So, MR spectroscopy, as we all know, is a bit challenging topic for many new residents and new consultants even. But I will try to make it sure that you get to at least report within limits of our specificity about the legends which we see. See, I have divided this presentation into two parts. One is the basic principles, which will be highlighting mostly the physics part of MR spectroscopy, and rest would be the clinical applications. We will see in which domains is spectroscopy extremely useful for us and help our patients to get a better diagnosis or help us in management of their ailments. So first we will discuss about the basic principles. So of course it will be full of physics, please be aware of it, but I will try to make it as lucid and as interesting as possible for me. So I will be dividing this physics into basically these broad categories, that what this spectroscopy actually is and how do we generate this MRI signal, and how we generate this spectra, especially what are the short key and log key images, what are their benefits, their limitations, what is single voxel, multi-voxel, when to use which type of imaging, of course normal spectrum and its variation if any with age and location in our brain, and then we will be discussing our most common metabolites which we encounter during reading of these spectral images. So first of all, I would like to tell that spectroscopy is about the characterizing the biochemical nature of the lesion. Just a second. Yeah. So it is characterizing the biochemical nature of the lesion, and it should be acknowledged that it is just complementary to the conventional MR imaging. It does not replace it. The idea is that you cannot go with a spectrum and say this is the diagnosis. This is very important point. You have to acknowledge the conventional MR images first and then see your spectroscopic diagram in its light. So this is the most important slide of physics. Basically, and encompasses everything. So whenever we take a patient inside the MR magnet, the protons inside the patient's body, which are moving haphazardly, become aligned in the direction of the applied magnetic field. So this magnetic field is actually in the long axis of this magnet. So now what the situation is that the patient is lying in the magnet in this position. The protons are aligned in the long axis, and one thing is more which you can't see here is that they are persisting at a fixed frequency, which is Larmor frequency of proton. Protons are persisting at Larmor frequency. Carbon atoms and oxygen atoms are persisting at their own frequency. Every atom has its own specific frequency. So what happens when we apply a magnetic field B1? So first of all, I would like to tell you that this B1 magnetic field is applied through special radio frequency coils. Okay, so just to recapitulate everything, the B0 magnetic field is always active in the magnet. It is never turned off. Now we have applied another magnetic field B1, which has been applied perpendicular to the magnetic field of the magnet. And so this longitudinal axis of these magnetized protons goes into the transverse plane, like here. So now the protons are in the transverse plane. As soon as this radio frequency coil stops emitting current, that is the magnetization is lost, they again come to the longitudinal axis. So when they do so, when coming from transverse to longitudinal axis, again they lose energy, and this lost energy here is transferred into receiver RF coils, which are also present in the bore of the magnet. And these coils then receive this signal and turn this signal into electrical currents this electrical current is fed to the Fourier system, which generates either images if we are seeing it on MRI or the spectrum if we are going for MRS. I think I am clear over here. So how do we generate the spectrum? Another point, which if we come back to this position, these protons are precessing at Larmor frequency, but actually each proton, in addition to experiencing the magnetic field of the magnet itself, is also experiences the magnetic field of atoms surrounding it. If these protons are in choline atmosphere, then they will be precessing at slightly different frequencies than when these protons are in water or say in Na. So there is slight difference in this precision frequency, and this difference is picked up by our receiver RF system, which then projects each frequency separately in the form of this graph. So what does this graph tells us is that this is the shift of the frequency from this Larmor frequency. So say if there were only protons in the world, they would be precessing here. So due to Na nature, they are precessing here. Due to creatinine, they are precessing here. Due to choline atmosphere, they are precessing here. And this is the amplitude of these precisions. So more a metabolite is, higher would be its speed. Right? So now what is a short T spectra and what is a long T spectra? As I have told you, this is the voltage induced by the recoiling protons. So initially the voltage is quite high and then gradually it keeps on decreasing and finally there is a flat baseline. So if we take images at this spot, when there is lot of induced voltage in the system, we will get short T images. If we take the images at this, then of course we will be getting very light signal. I think one thing you can appreciate right away is that the SNR would be high here and would be low here. Then why do we need long T images? We need long T images to clear out the spectra. See, when we see the short T images, every metabolite present in our brain will fire out. But many of these metabolites have very short T2 relaxation times. So with time they die out. And at this location, location TE, long TE, only few metabolites which are in adequate concentration, say in large concentration, would be left behind. So it would be easier to calculate metabolic ratios here. And there would be less overlap of metabolites. So you see the spectrum here. This short T spectra is too much crowded. The baseline is very much distorted. While this long T spectra, you see here baseline is very well defined. The peaks are sharp, stout, and only few peaks are seen. So if we have to see the interplay between Na, choline, and creatinine, of course, this is the best sequence. But if we want to acknowledge every metabolite present in that brain milieu, we need these short T images because like MI here, it will lose its T2 relaxation very sharp and would not be visible in these long T images. Same happens with amino acids, with GLX peaks and few others. So we need both these spectra. Short T spectra is required to know the complete detail of the metabolites and long T spectra is required to quantify them better. Okay. So now this is the chemical shift of the elements. So these are the important metabolites which we encounter in our spectra, and this is the chemical shift. Minded, these chemical shifts will remain stable throughout the spectra, whether the spectra is taken at 1.5 or the spectra is taken at 3 Tesla, 7 Tesla, wherever the spectra is taken, the location of Na, say, would always be at 2 ppm. So in order to see Na spectra, you have to go to 2 ppm, see the height of that peak, that is the location of Na. In this slide, I think it's quite obvious. Single voxel, we are just taking one voxel. In multi-voxel, we are taking a whole bunch of voxels, which encompasses the entire lesion. So a question may come in our mind that when we are having multi-voxel MRS, why are we going for single voxel? So this of course is a good question. The important points are that in multi-voxel MRS, we can just acquire long T images. because this is multi-voxel imaging, it requires lot of time to acquire the spectra. Short T spectrum is not being acquired in multi-voxel MRS, and we need single voxel for that. Another very important differentiation between them is the shimming. In single voxel MRS, we just need to shim this amount of brain parenchyma, which is quite easy and quite accurate to be shimmed. While in multi-voxel MRS, usually the entire slice volume is being shimmed. This shimming is less accurate and of course then will give more noise in the spectrum. This is the same differences which I have been talking about. Another important time is the scan time. The single voxel imaging gets off early, within 6 minutes usually we acquire the spectra. In multi-voxel it takes longer time. So every patient may not be, may not be able to take this long spectra of every patient. Yeah, so now this is very important. That is the placement of the voxel. See, you are seeing this MR image. It looks quite noisy. This is a frequent thing in our departments. We get these images. We call the technician. We say them, oh, what is this image? I can't interpret anything. Just go and get this sequence done again. So same thing can happen with MRS spectra also. This is a lower one is the MR spectra, full of noise. We can't acknowledge any peak except maybe this NA peak. So this spectra also needs to be repeated. The idea of telling you this is that the voxel placement is the thing which is of paramount importance in this. And we have to steer clear of the blood, bone, CSF and cystic areas in the voxel. So now how do we localize that from where this signal is coming? Like you are seeing a raised choline peak. How do you know that from which part of the brain or from which part of the tumor this particular choline spectra is coming? For that, what we do is we give the B1 pulse in all the 3 dimensions, in x-axis, in y-axis and also in z-axis. And we take the spectra from only those portions of the brain where all these 3 B1 are there. Like you see here. So this small voxel would be imaged. And this y-axis, say, we can, by slice selecting gradient, we can move it from anterior to posterior over the x gradient. So this voxel can be moved in this direction also, can be moved in this direction also, if we do so in z-axis. So we will divide this entire cuboid into many small cubicles and we would be able to get the spectra from every cubicle, wherever we want. So this is the basically localization technique of single voxel. Multi-voxel is quite easier than this. We just plot the slice select gradient in one axis. Say this is in y-axis. We start sampling from one end of the axis towards the other end by phase encoding gradients. And we get the spectra from each phase encoding gradient and plot it over here. Then we do this in x-axis. Then we do this in z-axis. So we get all the spectra over here in minute voxels, all at a single time. Okay, so now this is the most important part. Why we are not seeing any water peak in our spectrum? We already know that there is lots of water. 83% of our body is made up of water only. So there should be a big water peak. Why we need to suppress this peak? The reason behind it is that the spectrum is very innocent. It doesn't see that which peak is important, which peak is not important. It will project the largest peak and then it will scale rest of the spectrum according to it. So presently our spectrum is seeing that largest peak is of water. It is projecting it in total and that is why all the metabolite peaks are minified here. Of course, nothing can be got out of it. We need to suppress this peak and for this we use a very clever method called as chemical shift selective gradient. What we do in this is we give RF pulse right at the Larmor frequency of water to the sample before doing anything else. This pushes the longitudinal magnetization of water into transverse plane. And then we give a spoiler gradient and cancel out the entire water impulse. This we do repeatedly. And in this way, the water peak gets minified into a reasonable size. So that's when this spectrum will make this ppm scaling here, it won't interfere with interpretation of these metabolites, and these are seen in appropriate proportions. So now we come to spectra, and now we will remain in the spectrum only. So this is a basic normal spectrum. What is Hunter's line and Hunter's angle? You may be asked this question by your examiners also, because this was quite a popular thing when the MRS was invented. Actually, what happened was that initially we knew there were only few peaks: MI, choline, creatinine, and Na. And when we projected these peaks repeatedly in normal subjects, we saw that a line is being followed where the highest peak is of Na and the lowest peak is of Mi. Whenever there is a tumor in the body, choline is usually always elevated. So this disrupts this line. Okay. So the idea was that if the Hunter's line is there, and if it is making 45 degrees angle with the baseline, the patient is normal. There is no abnormal signal from the particular part of the lesion or the brain. If the Hunter's line is broken or is skewed, then we know that this is due to choline, or it is due to decreased Na, maybe sometimes due to increased Mi. So this line gets disturbed. Of course, this is now a very unreliable sign, because now we know there are many other peaks which are very important, and we need to consider them to make our diagnosis. So this another slide. What are the variations with age? See, this is not much of a trouble in adults, because after attaining 4 years of age, the spectrum is same as that of any adult and will remain so for rest of the period of the person's life. It is only during 4 days to 4 weeks that there are gradual changes, very important changes though. But the changes are when baby is born, the choline is the highest peak. It keeps on decreasing as the baby is growing till 4 years of age, when it almost reaches the adult spectrum. Same happens with Na over here. Na is very less because it basically corresponds with the myelination. As the myelination proceeds, Na keeps on increasing till 4 years of age. It is again almost like an adult spectrum. So this is from parietal white matter. This is from occipital white matter. Just need to tell you, it is happening everywhere in both the cerebral hemispheres, anteriorly as well as posteriorly. To add slightly further to our confusion, there is variations in the supratentorial and infratentorial spectra also. So like you can see here that the choline is more anteriorly than it is posteriorly. This happens again in corpus callosum also and in brain parenchyma also. If you see here, this is the choline metabolic map. You see this where the image is more bright, this is more choline. Where image is less bright, it is less choline. We can easily appreciate that the choline is more in the central part than in the peripheral, as well as choline is more anteriorly than posteriorly. So if there is so much high variation in choline, how we would be able to acknowledge in the lesions if the choline is elevated or not? For that, we have a very simple and easy solution. Always try to get spectra from the opposite hemisphere at the same anatomical location. So you will compare it with the normal spectra at the same time and will get to know whether the choline is elevated in your disease spectrum or not. So this is variation in infratentorium. Only one thing is to be noted very clearly here. Pons has normally lots of choline. I would even say lots and lots of choline. You see their choline peak is so much high. If I would be getting this spectrum from supratentorial brain, I won't even see the anatomical images. Maybe I would jump, oh, it's either some malignancy or it is some profound demyelination, something is happening. But if it is in pons, it is absolutely normal. Okay, so we need to recognize that from where the spectra is coming. This is a very interesting slide. I think many of you would have seen this movie also. So like in our daily life, we have good people, we have bad people, and then I won't like to say, but we have some very ugly people. Same thing happens with our MR spectrum also. Like Na is a very good metabolite. Why it is good? Because it represents normal neuronal health. If we are having adequate Na in our spectrum, it means we are having normal neuronal health. That is, we are having normal number of neurons in that particular brain parenchyma. So choline is acclaimed as a bad metabolite. Why it is bad? Because it is elevated. If it is elevated, it is usually in tumors, sometimes even in demyelination and other pathologies also. But a raised choline is almost always abnormal. So it is considered a bad metabolite. And why lipid lactate are called ugly? What is this ugly? They are called ugly because actually they represent necrosis and anaerobic glycolysis. So all bad things are happening over there in that part of the brain, which is giving rise to these lipid and lactate peaks. So now we will be discussing the important metabolites, the last part of our physics component. I would be a little fast because I think it's taking slightly more time. This is the Na peak. Na peak is the highest peak over here. Most important thing to recognize is Na is found only in neurons. Just take note of it. You will find its importance later on. Decreased concentration of Na is a sign of neuronal loss or degradation. Like something is happening over there, which is causing the neuron to become either dead or is displacing these neurons, and something other is taking their place. That is why Na is decreasing. So just to exemplify, just see this image. So we have to catch hold of Na. So we will come to the ppm. We will go straight to 2 and we will see this peak. So this is the Na peak. See how minified it is. Definitely abnormal. If you remember from the Hunter's line, I have told you Na is the highest peak. It should be somewhere over here. Then it is decreasing over this particular region of brain. So this is indicating that this Na peak is not abnormal. Na is decreased in this level. Rest of the peaks we will discuss later on when we will come to those metabolites. So this was a case of glioblastoma. Now see this very interesting subject. A small child it is, and you see again come to 2 ppm. In this MR spectra, we are seeing a high peak of Na. So it is a very high peak of Na. The Hunter's angle, of course, it's not 45. I think it is around 60 or 70 degrees. So by just this, you can say that this Na peak is too much elevated. This is also abnormal. Excess of everything is bad in life. So this was actually a case of Kahneman disease, a very rare disease. Even I haven't encountered a single case. This is an internet image which I could gather for your knowledge. So this is third example. Okay, again, as we are following, we will come to 2 ppm. This is 2 ppm. I am searching for my Na peak. I am not getting any Na peak over here. So why there is no Na? There must be some reason for it. So what reasons can one person think of when there is no Na? First thing which comes in my mind is, are you screening in the brain? Aren't you outside the brain? So my friends, that is the point. Just see this image. Actually, this is an extraaxial lesion. Basically, it was a metastasis which has destroyed the frontotemporal bone also and is present both extracranially, intracranially. So this whole tissue you are seeing over here is not brain parenchyma at all. It was a renal metastasis. So in a renal metastasis, how can you expect Na peak? You can't expect. And that is why it is not there. Okay. So important thing to recognize is, many times you can see no Na peak in a spectrum. You have to just remember there are only a few reasons of not getting an Na peak. One is, like I told you, extraaxial lesion. Of course, meningioma also comes in that. That will also not give rise to a very good Na peak. Sometimes intraaxial lesions also not give rise to Na peak. There can be few reasons for that. One is, like if it is a metastasis intraaxial, it will also not having any brain parenchyma. Sometimes the cores of highly malignant tumor, they are so malignant that they will destroy the entire brain parenchyma. Won't left anything over there that is of the brain. In those cases also Na peak would be absent. And same is the theory applicable for brain abscesses also. So now coming to the creatine peak. So a creatine peak is most indolent, most innocent peak in our brain, and that is why we took it as a standard peak, and we try to compare the rise or fall of choline the rise or fall of Na in reference to this creatinine peak. You will read in all your reports, you will yourself report choline creatinine ratio, Na creatinine ratio, Mi creatinine ratio. Everybody is referring to creatinine because creatinine is a benchmark. It does not change in various pathological conditions much. So this is our most notorious of the peaks, that is the great choline peak. So why it is notorious? Because it is associated with all the bad things happening in our brain parenchyma. So it is said to be a tumor marker because in most of the tumors it is elevated. More it is elevated, more malignant the tumor is. You will see it shortly. And while some other processes are also there which give rise to increased choline, like MS, infarction, inflammation. Basically, wherever there is cell membrane turnover, wherever there is high cellular density, the choline would be raised over here, right? We will see two examples. A very interesting slide, I like it. Like you must have seen in Indian serials, the most evil lady is having the largest bindi. This I remember from my mother's teachings. So I have just seen this applies to choline also. The more evil the choline is, the higher would be its peak. If you see here, if the choline is elevated as related to creatinine by just about 1.5 times, usually it indicates benign processes like demyelination, infection, inflammation. It's okay, baby, you will get on very early. These things would be cured. Now, if the choline keeps on increasing and it goes above 2, sometimes it goes to 4, 5, 10, even 15. I have seen many cases, you too would have seen. It comes under high-grade glioma category, the most dreadful form, the most evil of the choline. Okay. So now we come to our fourth most important peak, that is the Mi peak. So Mi peak is always visible. It is at 3.56 ppm. This is a small peak. Usually it doesn't interfere with your metabolic milieu. This part is what we concentrate most of the time. But actually Mi is very important because it is elevated in low-grade glioma. While in high-grade gliomas, it is paradoxically low. There are reasons for it, but for the present discussion, I would just ask you to keep it in mind that a high Mi peak points towards a lower grade of malignancy. Mi is also elevated in gliomatosis cerebri. The reason is because in gliomatosis cerebri, there is glial cell activation. And actually the reason for Mi in our spectrum is only glial cells. The neurons don't secrete the myoinositol. Only the glial cells secrete it. So that is why in gliomatosis, it is elevated. The same thing I have exemplified over here. See this large Mi peak. It is coming from this part of the brain, affected brain. So this is gliomatosis cerebri. So now this peak, lactate peak, one of the notorious peaks because it indicates what? Anaerobic glycolysis and it indicates necrosis. Both the worst of the things. So what is important to remember in lactate peak is it is present at 1.33 ppm. Here we are seeing this at 35 millisecond T. This is intermediate T. This is long T. So what you will observe is that in short T and in long T, the lactate peak is upright. But in intermediate T, it is inverted. So what is the use of it? The use is just to acknowledge that it is a lactate peak because our lipid peak also comes at around this region only. You are seeing this at 35 millisecond. Actually, this peak is a bit abnormal because there is lipid also associated with it here. Okay, so the point to remember is lactate is the peak which gets inverted on intermediate T. These are the various causes of lactate peak. You don't need to remember all. You will learn them when you will experience the spectra. These are the most important reasons. Hypoxia, as we all know, hypoxia indicates oxygen deficiency. Our brain will have to switch to anaerobic glycolysis. Lactate would be produced. It would be seen in the spectrum. Very simple. In both low-grade gliomas and in high-grade gliomas, we will see lactate because the tumor cells love to form anaerobic glycolysis. They need lots of ATPs, but they need it very early. They switch to anaerobic glycolysis for that, and this gives rise to lactate, and that reflects in our MR spectrum. Okay, so other causes are also there. You have seen it. Now, this another important peak, lipid peak. Basically, lipid represents necrosis and cell membrane breakdown. Similar things to lactate. Wherever there is necrosis, wherever there is cell membrane breakdown, you will see these lipid peaks. They are present at 0.9 and 1.3 ppm. Look for them, but do take care. You have to watch your voxel also. Your voxel should not include any fat from the surrounding regions. Like here, there is lots of fat in subcutaneous tissue. There is lots of fat. You have to steer clear of them. Otherwise, you will get lipid peak from that part of the brain and not from the tumor. These are the causes of lipid peak. We will see in few examples. So this is very interesting slide. So what it is showing us very similar spectra from two, of course, similar looking lesions. This lesions also appears to be malignant, mass effect, edema, necrosis. This also looks, of course, it is quite bigger, but edema, necrosis, mass effect, everything is there. Spectra is same. This must be same lesions. But my dear friends, these are not the same lesions. Very important point. Please give attention to this. This is metastasis from CA breast, and this is a glioblastoma. Of course, though both would be managed differently. So how will we recognize these separate in case of MR spectroscopy? We have to see these peritumoral regions. In case of glioblastoma, as it is an infiltrative malignancy, you will see raised choline in this normal looking brain, which is being infiltrated by the glial cell. While in case of metastasis, you will see normal spectra in this surrounding regions. Okay. Alanine peak is specific for meningioma. I will just be passing fast. It's taking too much of time. Just keep in mind that alanine, when present in meningioma, will give us two peaks. One at the level of lactate, it is actually at 1.4, and another at 3.8. So whenever there is inverted peak over here, similar to lactate, do watch at 3.8. If a peak is there, probably it is due to alanine, not lactate. This is also in meningioma, giving rise to alanine peak. Taurine is specific for medulloblastoma. I'll just pass off. This is now the GLX peak. Only one thing to remember, because so of negativity we have heard. Now this is something positive. GLX, if present, usually suggests a non-neoplastic lesion. It is created by glial cell, and it is a result of usually demyelination. So it indicates its high presence indicates some non-neoplastic lesion. It also increases in encephalopathy. So friends, the difficult part is over. Now we will come to more interesting part, that is the clinical application part of this presentation. So all of this you have heard, it has been quite heavy on your brains. The reason is, what's the use of MR spectroscopy? Should we throw it away? It is creating so much confusion, or is it helping us anywhere? My friends, it is most important, at least in these three things. In differentiating radiation necrosis and tumor recurrence, even most experienced of the radiologists would not be able to recognize these separately from each other by looking the MR images alone. They need help of either spectroscopy or perfusion. Also very important to decide the biopsy site. I will tell you in an example later on, and response to treatment. These are some other indications. I will just skip them. So again, what is the protocol for doing the MR spectroscopy? Suppose you are sitting in your reporting room, your technician comes and asks you, sir, there is a patient for MR spectroscopy, sir, kya loon? So what you will tell? Just a brief introduction on it. If the patient has come with yet to be a diagnosed case, you will need to take both single voxel image and multi-voxel image. Why? Because single voxel image will give you all the metabolites and thus will help you make the initial diagnosis. And multi-voxel image, because it will cover a large part of the brain, it will help you in characterizing the different regions of the mass, especially in very heterogeneous tumors, and will also help you assess the brain parenchyma adjacent to the mass, and sometimes even of the opposite cerebral hemisphere, which is quite normal. And if it is a confirmed case of tumor, sir, ये तो follow-up में आया है, then you just need to take multi-voxel image, because you just need to know the response to therapy
or you want to know whether it is a tumor recurrence or not. So what is the spectroscopy we expect in brain tumor? See, this is a normal thing expected out of every brain tumor. Choline would be increased because it represents cellular density. Na would be decreased because our innocent brain parenchyma has been thrown away due to tumor. Lipid lactate would be seen if the tumor is too much malignant, if it has caused too much of necrosis. Okay. So you can see our example over here, lots of choline, and is depressed. So this is basically a chart. Just go to this neuroimaging clinics. This is the article, very beautiful article for basics as well as I think it helps for advanced users also. The chart is simple, telling us in which things the benign pathologies, which metabolites are increased, in malignant pathologies, which are increased. So neoplastic, non-neoplastic, I'll just skip it off. I'm getting too short of time over here. So the extraaxial versus intraaxial lesions, just a short note, if the spectra is showing choline, choline and choline only, nothing else, then take sure you are not in an intraaxial compartment, because you are not seeing any Na peak, you are not seeing any creatine peak. It means you are dealing with extraaxial tumor. Choline, my dear friends, would always be elevated. Even if you take your voxel to prostate, to breast, to lung, you will see rise in choline. Okay. So just look at this. So of course, by your intelligence, you would be able to see that because this is an going along the pathway of a nerve, this looks like to be a schwannoma. So just to highlight why I have shown this slide over here is, you see when I have taken the spectra from here, from this portion of the tumor, it has given me only choline. No Na, no creatinine, only choline. So this points that this tumor is extraaxial. It was actually a malignant schwannoma. Same is happening over here, but this is a bit tedious. This lesion doesn't look to be extraaxial. It looks to be surrounded by brain parenchyma all over. When I did spectroscopy, I found only choline. So what possible diagnosis can I give? At least I can give possibility of an extraaxial tumor. But from where an extraaxial tumor arises at this location? Friends, always remember, intraventricular tumors are also extraaxial tumor, and this was of course a case of intraventricular meningioma. So now high grade and low grade glioma, WHO, because it sees histology, grades the tumor from 1 to 4. We radiologists, and of course for most treatment purposes, we need to classify just low grade and high grade gliomas. So there are conventional criteria to discriminate them. Similarly, there are MRS criteria also. For MRS in our brain tumors, we would like to see these metabolites most importantly. Choline elevated, it indicates high grade tumor, more elevated, more high grade tumor. Na low, further low, higher the grade of glioma. Lactate if present indicates high grade glioma. Only MI you need to remember. If there is more MI, it suggests lower grade of glioma. These are the cutoff values of the ratios. Please read it on your own. I don't have much time. So this is an example. You see this legend over here. When I did the MR spectra over here, it looks about normal spectra until I put my eye on this MI peak. Friends, just remember one thing. This is creatinine peak and this is MI peak. Whenever the MI peak is risen above the creatinine peak, this almost indicates a raised MI. And at least you can put a differential of low grade glioma, even in this case. Instead of just writing it, you can say demyelination or something, everything benign, you should just say a possibility of low grade glioma and advise a follow-up. We will see it later on. Another case, this case already looks quite exuberant, mass over here with lots of enhancement, mass effect. This was the spectrum. I would expect even this, very high choline. See, compare it with Na. Very high choline creatinine ratio, very high choline Na ratio, and there is lipid lactate over here also. So this was a highly malignant tumor. Histology revealed glioblastoma multiforme. Now this slide I am just going to take a small amount of time here. This is actually a multivoxel spectra. but I have shown only this voxel and only this voxel of that multivoxel acquisition. You see in this part of the tumor, when I do the spectroscopy, I see only slight rise of choline over creatinine. While when I take this sample, I see very high choline. So of course the tumor is heterogeneous. There can be areas of more metabolic activity. To our radiologist, what is important is you take that part of the voxel, you take that voxel which is having highest choline and highest choline creatinine ratio. So you will classify this tumor into a high grade tumor, taking this voxel into consideration and ignoring this voxel. Okay, this is very simple. Second help which you will help your neurosurgeon is an area of the tumor which is showing very high choline should be biopsy. If he cannot take out the entire tumor, you should tell him to at least take the tumor from this part of the lesion so that he can get a high histological spectra. Now this is a very common question. Radiation necrosis. Your oncologist would be sending you these patients. Okay, whether this is a radiation necrosis or there is a recurrence. You will do MRI. You will see this enhancing area. You will say, sir, it looks like to be a recurrence, but radiation necrosis also gives similar picture. Sir, I am not sure. So what to do in such cases? You will do MR spectroscopy. You see here what you are seeing in this MR spectroscopy is choline is slightly elevated. Slight elevation of choline, my friends, can be there in radiation necrosis also, but Na is quite okay. You can say that the spectra is nearly normal. And so this was actually a case of radiation necrosis only. This was not a recurrence. You can send the patient for follow-up. This is another case of radiation necrosis. I would be tumor recurrence, because you see there is very high choline here, very high choline. So this is a recurrence. This is another case. So just a short time I would be taking here, but different in this case is that I have taken spectra from this normal part of the brain at the same anatomical location as this enhancing portion. So this spectra is here and this spectra is here. The difference is just the spectra taken from the tumor is showing depressed Na, while the spectra taken from the normal part of the brain is giving a normal Na. So by comparing these two spectra, I am very confident that every one of us can say that this is a recurrent tumor, because the choline Na ratio is quite elevated, Na is quite depressed, and this came out to be so after this section. Follow-up of the lesion. Okay, this was a young patient. We found this lesion. We said this looks like a demyelination, but when we did MRS, we saw that the choline is slightly elevated. We're not very sure, there was not much MI, but we just kept the possibility of low-grade glioma. Even then the neurosurgeon got the biopsy of it and it came out to be grade 2 glioma. Patient was left on follow-up because many a times these lesions don't grow that much. Patient came to us after 9 months and we saw this lesion has slightly grown up. The spectra has grown up quite further and the choline has now quite raised. Na is further depressed. And what more drastic thing I am seeing is this raised lipid lactate. Now this is making me alarmed, and we have given the possibility of high grade glioma, and the histology was again done and came out to be grade 3 glioma. Okay, so interval progression of choline creatinine or choline Na points towards malignant progression. This I will skip. So brain abscess, of course, brain abscess. In brain abscess, we will see lots of metabolites which are there for amino acids, for acetate, succinate. These peaks are never seen in tumors. So if you are seeing these peaks in a ring enhancing lesion, my friends, you are dealing with brain abscesses. So further help which MR spectroscopy can give us is in discriminating between whether the abscesses are pyogenic or tubercular or fungal. So at least if we are not very sure, we can at least give possibility that this possibly is a tubercular abscess, this possibly is a pyogenic abscess. How we will differentiate is if there is lipid only in your spectrum, then this points towards the tubercular nature of abscess. If you are seeing acetate and succinate peaks, this points towards pyogenic abscess. And if this sugar trehalose is there in your spectrum, this is secreted by fungi only. So it points towards fungal abscess. See this, only lipid peak, this was the lesion, came out to be tubercular abscess. Next, this is there, you are getting acetate peak, came out to be pyogenic abscess. This next, you are seeing amino acids, lactate, nothing here. But when we come to 3.6 to 3.8, we are seeing these two small peaks. These are trehalose peaks and points towards fungal nature of the lesion, which it came out to be. Again, please, I will take some time over here because this is common clinical entity encountered. Your neurologist will come to you and will say, sir, should I start ATT? Is it tuberculoma? Are you sure? So of course, by MRI, we always give possibility of this looks like tuberculoma, but NCC cannot be ruled out. MR spectroscopy can be slightly further helpful in this. What we have to see is a lipid lactate peak. If there is a big lipid lactate peak over here, this indicates towards tuberculoma. If choline is slightly raised, this indicates towards again tuberculoma. Lymphoma, I will just skip off. In multiple sclerosis, only 1 point. If you will do MR spectroscopy in multiple sclerosis, if the lesion is acute, you will see lactate over there. This you will not see in older and chronic lesions. Now this another example, this looked like a demyelination. We did spectroscopy, choline was quite raised. This came out to be a low grade glioma. So this is another example of demyelination. I will just skip it. So this is a very important, very intelligent article written by many authors. Please go through this article in Radiology. It is totally free, available to everyone. It will take you from 0 to at least 80% of the knowledge of spectroscopy. At least your reports would be totally justified. You can help the patient. So this is actually the graph, very useful graph. This is basically an MRI. This is the last slide. Please bear with me. This is going to end over here. So what this graph is, flowchart is telling us is that we need diffusion, we need spectroscopy, and we need perfusion. All of these three to quantify our lesions in these possible diagnoses: low grade, high grade neoplasm, metastasis, and abscesses. So what we do is now in our clinical practice, we do all these three and we label it as multi-parametric MRI, like the way we are doing in prostate. So we get the perfusion, we get the diffusion, we get the MR spectroscopy. Then we are much more accurate in quantifying our lesions. Please go through that article. It has this same flowchart also. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Marwa, for a wonderful talk. I think you really made it very simple for us. Now we'll move to the next session of the day by Dr. Kalpana Bansal, who is going to show us interesting cases of neurology.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Kalpana Bansal is an assistant professor at GB Pant Hospital in New Delhi. She has worked previously at Maulana Azad Medical College, Chacha Nehru Bal Chikitsalaya, and Institute of Liver and Biliary Sciences at Kasanpur.
So there are few questions.
She has been invited guest speaker in many conferences. She also presented papers and posters at national and international conferences. She has more than 50 publications in different journals. Her area of interest is neuroimaging, particularly and pediatric imaging. Dr. Kalpana Bansal, please.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Dr. Goel, there are few questions for Dr. Marwa in the chat box and the Q&A box, if you can address them.
Should we take at the end, ma'am, or should we proceed now?
Okay, later, sir, can you address them in the chat box then?
Okay.
Okay, I will reply in chat.
Can you request Dr. Marwa to address the question in the chat box in the Q&A session?
Yeah, we'll do that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Kalpana ma'am, you can continue.
Okay, thank you. A very good evening to everyone. Can you all see my screen? Is it visible, sir?
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Okay, thank you so much. At the outset, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Anjali ma'am, Dr. Shibani ma'am, Dr. Shalini ma'am, and Dr. Goel sir for giving me this wonderful opportunity. So in the next 30 minutes, I shall be taking you through interesting cases of neuroimaging. In the interest of time and delegate interest, I have divided my talk into two halves. In the first half, we'll be doing it in a quiz format where the delegates and students can answer these spotters through their voting pads, and then we'll explain the spotters. And the second session will only be display of these spotter cases, and there will be no quiz session, but we'll be explaining the cases. So I hope all the delegates are ready for a brainstorming spotter session in neuroimaging. So here we start with our first case. These are the axial CT images of a child. So the options available here are porencephalic cyst, closed lip schizencephaly, arachnoid cyst, and open lip schizencephaly. So the delegates and the students may press their answers. Waiting for the response. Great. So the majority of you have answered it correctly. It is a case of open lip schizencephaly. Let me explain it. Here you can see a CSF filled white cleft extending from the ependymal lining of the ventricular surface till the pile surface of the brain, extending through the entire cerebral parenchyma. This you can see in all the images. So here it follows CSF density that you can very well appreciate, and it is communicating with the ventricular system. The other type of schizencephaly is a closed lip schizencephaly, where you do not see this white cleft, and instead only a lipper-like outpouching is seen. Sorry, just a second. Sorry, sir, I'm not able to view my screen.
Amit, please help the technical team. Please help. Please assist.
Is it visible, sir?
Yeah, it's visible.
Okay, thank you so much. So I was talking about the closed lip schizencephaly. An important differential in this case is a porencephalic cyst. And the point of differentiation is that the porencephalic cyst, since it is a dead brain tissue, so it is lined by a gliotic white matter, whereas the schizencephaly is lined by the gray matter. And MR is much more helpful in differentiating the two. So coming to the next spotter, this is also an easy one. The axial non-contrast enhanced CT scan. The available options are porencephalic cyst, schizencephaly, arachnoid cyst, and epidermoid. This is an easy one. I hope everybody will be able to get this. Absolutely right. So this is a case of arachnoid cyst. As you all know, the arachnoid cysts are also CSF density extraaxial lesions, which are most commonly located in the middle cranial fossa, as seen in this case, and they do not communicate with the ventricular system, but may widen the Sylvian cistern, as seen in this case. Just to show the MR appearance of an arachnoid cyst in posterior fossa, they appear hypointense on T1 and hyperintense on T2 with complete signal suppression on FLAIR sequence. So they follow the CSF signal intensity on all sequences, and do not show diffusion restriction, as you can see here, which is an important point differentiating it from a epidermoid cyst, as we'll see it later. Here you can also see that there is some mass effect on the fourth ventricle, which has resulted in obstructive hydrocephalus in this patient. So this is a case of retrocerebellar arachnoid cyst. Now the next spotter, again, there is a cystic lesion in the left CP angle system. The MR images, the options are cystic schwannoma, arachnoid cyst, epidermoid cyst, and leptomeningeal cyst. I hope we'll be able to get this also. The majority will be able to respond correctly. Yes, right. So again, this is an easy one. This is a case of epidermoid cyst, as I have already explained previously. Sorry, it is not moving further.
Ma'am, on the left lower corner, can you see the arrows, left and
Yeah.
right arrows?
Yeah. So the answer here is an epidermoid cyst. Just to explain it, can we remove this share result box?
I've removed it.
So this is again a cystic lesion where you can see it is following the CSF signal intensity, appearing hypointense on T1 weighted image, hyperintense on T2 weighted image, showing few hypointense contents within, and shows partial signal suppression on the FLAIR images, in contrast to arachnoid cyst, where it is showing the complete signal suppression, giving a dirty CSF type of picture. And on diffusion restriction, in contrary to arachnoid cyst, you can see presence of diffusion restriction here, and there is no contrast enhancement on post-contrast images. So rightly identified, this is a case of arachnoid cyst, epidermoid cyst. Coming to the next one, this is just to show the classical imaging of meningioma, as you all know. Here we can see extraaxial CP angle lesion appearing hyperdense on non-contrast images with few specks of calcification within, and showing intense post-contrast enhancement. Important thing to note here is the presence of normal internal auditory canal. So this is the case of CP angle meningioma. Just to show the MR appearance of a case of meningioma, it appears iso-intense to the gray matter on T1 and T2 weighted images. As you can see here, this is appearing hypointense on T1 and T2 weighted images, as well as FLAIR images with very minimal perilesional edema. And presence of a CSF cleft, you can appreciate on this T2 weighted image. Sorry, Mr. Amit, the marker is not visible.
Can you just stop sharing and reshare it? I have stopped it for you.
Okay. Shall I reshare?
Yes, please.
Still it is not visible. Mr. Amit, can you please help? The stop share is not
Okay, fine.
helping.
Just
The
give me a
arrow is not there.
See, can you see again the arrows to move the slide?
Yes.
There is this pen-like thing.
Yeah.
Can you click on it?
Yeah. Okay.
You can see
Okay,
the
fine.
arrow.
Thank you. So sorry for the inconvenience. Let's get back to it. So this is a case of meningioma where you can see a soft tissue lesion extraaxial, which is iso-intense to the gray matter on T1, T2 and FLAIR images with presence of very minimal perilesional edema. You can appreciate CSF cleft on this T2 image very well. And there is intense homogeneous post-contrast enhancement with presence of a dural tail, that is enhancing dura, which is typical of a case of meningioma. So this is a next interesting spotter. So hands on your voting pads. These are the MR images of a patient showing multiple lesions. You have to give the complete diagnosis. The options available are bilateral vestibular schwannoma and meningioma. Bilateral vestibular schwannoma and meningioma suggestive of NF1, bilateral vestibular schwannoma and meningioma suggestive of NF2, and bilateral acoustic schwannoma and ependymoma suggestive of NF2. So just mark your answers quickly. Great. So most of you have got this again right. So this is a case of bilateral vestibular schwannoma and meningioma suggestive of NF2. Just to describe this case, as you can very well see on these axial MR images, there are extraaxial soft tissue density lesion in bilateral CP angles extending into the internal auditory canals and showing intense post-contrast enhancement suggestive of vestibular schwannomas. In addition, there is a lesion in the right parasagittal location, which is iso-intense to the gray matter on T2 weighted sequences, showing blooming on susceptibility weighted images consistent with calcification, and shows intense post-contrast enhancement with presence of dural tail suggestive of meningioma. So this is a case of bilateral vestibular schwannoma with meningioma. The presence of bilateral vestibular schwannoma is considered pathognomic of NF2, and you can remember NF2 by the simple mnemonic MISME, where you see multiple lesion. It is an inherited disorder characterized by multiple schwannomas, characteristically bilateral vestibular schwannomas. There can be multiple meningiomas in skull or spine. Ependymomas may also be present, though they are rare, but may be seen within the spinal cord. Coming to the next spotter, this is again an interesting one. These are the axial non-contrast sections of the brain and the bone window. Just mark your answers. The options are cerebral arteriovenous malformation, Torch infection, Dyke-Davidoff-Messen syndrome, and Sturge-Weber syndrome. So I hope we'll be able to get this one as well. Absolutely right. Great. Now this time we have got 90% correct. So it's a case of Sturge-Weber syndrome. Just to describe this a bit, here you can see unilateral cerebral atrophy with presence of cortical and subcortical calcification, giving a tram-track appearance with associated enlargement or thickening of the calvarial and presence of choroidal enlargement as well. So this is a case of Sturge-Weber syndrome, which is another phakomatosis characterized by facial port wine stains and pyelangiomas. Next spotter. Here, this is a child who presented with seizures, and we have the MR images, including the contrast enhanced MR and diffusion weighted images. So here are the options: ganglioglioma, DNET, astrocytoma, oligodendroglioma. So you can just mark your answers quickly. Great. The majority of you have picked it up right. This is the case of dysembryoblastic neuroepithelial tumor. As you can see here, there is a well-defined cortical-based lesion in the left temporal lobe, which is appearing hypointense on T1, hyperintense on T2, giving a sort of bubbly appearance with partial signal suppression or flare sequence and showing no evidence of diffusion restriction and no or minimal contrast enhancement. So this is the characteristic appearance of a DNET. The important differential here will be a ganglioglioma, which usually show contrast enhancement and may have a cystic appearance with a mural nodule. So coming to the next one. This is again a posterior fossa mass lesion. We have the non-contrast and the contrast enhanced axial CT images. Here are your options: astrocytoma, medulloblastoma, ependymoma, and hemangioblastoma. So you can mark your answers in this case. Just to help you in this, this was a pediatric patient who presented with features of raised intracranial tension. Absolutely right. So this is a case of medulloblastoma. Here you can see a midline mass in the region of vermis, and the fourth ventricle is not visualized. The mass shows heterogeneous post-contrast enhancement with presence of cystic or necrotic areas, and there is mass effect in the form of obstructive hydrocephalus. So these medulloblastomas are the most common malignant brain tumor of the childhood and commonly present due to mass effect with resultant obstructive hydrocephalus. The important point to note in this is approximately 40% of these patients present with CSF seeding at the time of diagnosis. So it is important to screen the spine as well in such cases. And majority of these cases arise in the midline in the region of vermis. Coming to the next posterior fossa lesion. These are again the non-contrast as well as the contrast enhanced CT images. Here are your options: a pilocytic astrocytoma, medulloblastoma, ependymoma, and hemangioblastoma. So you can mark your answers. This is a very typical appearance of the mass lesion, which is shown here. I hope everybody will be able to get this one. So this is the confusing part here. There is a confusion between pilocytic astrocytoma and hemangioblastoma here. Though the right answer is hemangioblastoma. Let me explain you this one. Here you are seeing a well-defined cystic lesion with a mural nodule which is present along the pial surface of the lesion, and this lesion is showing intense contrast enhancement, the solid nodule part. However, the cyst wall is not showing any contrast enhancement, which is commonly seen in case of pilocytic astrocytoma. Just to show the MR appearance of the same patient, here again we are seeing a cystic lesion following CSF signal intensity on T1 and T2 weighted images with presence of eccentric mural nodule along the pial surface. You can note the presence of these tiny black dots within, which represent the vascular flow voids, which are characteristics of hemangioblastoma. And there is incomplete signal suppression on the FLAIR images because of the fluid nature. And these again show intense post-contrast enhancement. The important points to note in a case of hemangioblastoma is that they are also WHO grade 1 tumor, seen in young to middle-aged adults, but may be seen earlier in patients with VHL, and they are commonly associated with pheochromocytoma, multiple RCCs, VHL as already said, and polycythemia. Coming to the next portal, again a mass lesion in a pediatric patient. This is an easy one. I hope you'll be able to get this one. The options are pilocytic astrocytoma, ependymoma, subependymal giant cell astrocytoma, and choroid plexus papilloma. Showing the case again, you can mark your options. These are the options. Great. So the 60% have got it right. It is the subependymal giant cell astrocytoma. As you can very well appreciate in these MR images, there is a large intraventricular mass, cystic solid, which is seen in the region of the foramen of Monro, and it is showing intense post-contrast enhancement, the solid component, and the diffusion restriction. In addition, you may note these tiny subependymal nodules also here, which are appearing T2 hypointense and hyperintense on T1, maybe due to calcification. So which clinches the diagnosis as subependymal giant cell astrocytoma. This is another case of tuberous sclerosis, because these are generally exclusively seen in patients with tuberous sclerosis, where you can appreciate this subependymal calcified nodules very well. In the same patient in MR, you can also appreciate presence of these cortical-based lesions and enhancement of the subependymal nodules. The subependymal giant cell astrocytoma are histologically indistinguishable from these subependymal nodules, except for their growth. They are generally larger in size. So tuberous sclerosis, we all know, it is also a neurocutaneous syndrome, also known as Bonne-Villiers disease. And neurologically, the cases usually have cortical or subcortical tubers, subependymal hematomas, subependymal giant cell astrocytomas, and various white matter abnormalities. Now coming to the next spotter, this is an interesting one. These are the MR images. The options are astrocytoma, tumefactive demyelination, metastasis, and lymphoma. These are all the important differential in such a lesion, and you need to differentiate these. You can mark your answers. Great. So 70% of you have got it correct. It's a tumefactive demyelination. This case we came across. This patient had this irregularly marginated lesion appearing hypointense on T1, hyperintense on T2, and FLAIR images extending through the body and splenium of corpus callosum. Interestingly, this is not showing any diffusion restriction. There is no perilesional edema, and the contrast enhancement shows rim type of enhancement, which is open. And the MRS in this case was non-specific. So a possibility of tumefactive demyelination was raised. These are the scans which were performed 3 months later post steroid treatment, and the lesion shows marked reduction in size and enhancement. And the ASL was also performed in this case, which showed hypoperfusion in the area of interest. The MRS was again inconclusive. So in such a case, the differential diagnosis comes between neoplasm and progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy, and the points which favor tumefactive demyelination, as I already explained, are presence of ring-like or open rim enhancement, absence of mass effect, and perilesional edema. In addition, diffusion and MRS may also help you that there are high ADC values, and the MRS may show gamma glutamate or glutamine peak, as already explained by Dr. Vineet, and which are specific to tumefactive demyelinating disease. Now, another easy one, spotter, the brain and spine images, MR images of a child who presented with a lower back mass. The options are lipomyelomeningocele, myelomeningocele, meningocele with carry 2 malformation, and myelomeningocele with carry 1 malformation. So these are the MR images, spine and brain. You can mark your options. Lipo-MMC, So this is a case of myelomeningocele with carry-2 malformation. As you can see here, this is the photograph of the child, which is showing a non-skin cover defect with a mass in the lower back region, and the MR spine is showing a cystic CSF density fluid lesion in the lower lumbosacral region with spinal dysraphism and presence of neural elements. The neural peccord is seen outside the defect, and in addition, the brain is showing shallow posterior fossa with descent of the cerebella vermis, brainstem, and posterior fossa structure through the foramen magnum. Next photo, the MR images of a patient who presented with headache. The options are glioblastoma multiforme, metastasis, lymphoma, and hemangioblastoma. You can just mark your answers. Absolutely right. This is a case of high-grade glioma, that is glioblastoma multiforme. Here you are seeing a lesion in the left temporoparietal region, which is appearing hypo on T1, hyperintense on T2, and flare, showing diffusion restriction and intense post-contrast enhancement. As you can see here, the cyst wall is also enhancing, which is in contrast to the hemangioblastoma, and there is associated marked perilesional edema, which is suggestive of a high-grade tumor. This is an easy spotter. We have the MR images of a patient, which is showing a lesion in the right parietal lobe. The options are AV malformation, hematoma, cavernoma, and hemorrhagic metastasis. You can mark your answers here. This is again a classical spotter and an easy one, and you all must be able to get this one. Absolutely right. So this is a cavernoma, which is also now known as the slow flow venous malformation, which is the third most common malformation after developmental venous anomaly and capillary telangiectasia. Here you can see a ill-defined hypointense lesion on T1, T2, and flare sequences, which is showing marked blooming on SWI image and appearing dark on phase images, and showing no or very minimal contrast enhancement. The last spotter, where you have the option of voting pad, an interesting one. These are the MR images of a child. The options are metachromatic leukodystrophy, Canavan's disease, MELAS, and Van der Napp disease. Just to show the image again, you can mark your answers. Good, we have got a very good response. This is a case of Van der Napp disease. The other name for Van der Napp is megaloencephalic leukoencephalopathy with subcortical cyst, where you can see bilateral symmetrical white matter hyperintensities involving the subcortical white matter with associated megaloencephaly and a subcortical cyst characteristically located in the anterior temporal lobe and the frontoparietal lobe, as seen in this case. So with this, we come to the end of the half of the spotter session, where we have the voting pad option. In the next cases, I'll be just rushing through the cases, and if you want, you can write your option in the chat box. Like this is a case of a child who presented with intractable seizure. Here you can see thickened cortex with blurring of the gray-white matter junction, suggestive of a fibrous cortical defect type 2. I'll not be going into the detail. Another case where the child presented with seizures and you have a smooth brain. That is, listen carefully. This is the classical type 1, where you see a classic hourglass or figure of 8 appearance. And in type 2, you see multiple polymicrogylia. Another interesting spotter where you are seeing bulky choroid plexus showing intense enhancement in the atria of left atrial ventricle, a case of choroid plexus papilloma. A classical case of multiple sclerosis where you can see demyelinating lesions involving the juxtacortical and periventricular white matter oriented perpendicular to the lateral ventricle. These are the sagittal FLAIR images, which are very helpful in cases of multiple sclerosis. And the spine is also showing presence of a demyelinating plaque. The important differential for multiple sclerosis is another acute demyelinating lesion, that is multiple sclerosis. In this case, you have bilateral T2 hyperintensities, but they predominantly involve the subcortical white matter. And the important differentiating features between MS and EDEM are that MS has a multiphasic course, whereas EDEM has a monophasic course, and the lesions are periventricular in both, but they are more fluffy in EDEM, and corpus callosum involvement is more commonly seen in multiple sclerosis, and basal nuclear involvement is more commonly seen in cases of EDEM, and optic nerve involvement is exclusive to multiple sclerosis. In spine, the MS has segmental involvement, whereas EDEM has a more longitudinal extensive involvement. A classical spotter, a case of pituitary macroadenoma. Here you are seeing a hyperdense mass in the cellular suprasellar region, which is showing intense post-contrast enhancement. Just to show the MR appearance of similar case, where you are seeing a hypointense mass in the cellular suprasellar region, which is showing intense post-contrast enhancement. Here you can see the mass is also extending into the right cavernous sinus, and there is presence of wasting at the diaphragma cellae, which is characteristic of pituitary macroadenoma. Another case of a suprasellar region. Here you are seeing the mass predominantly in the suprasellar region, and you can appreciate the pituitary very well lying within the sella and the posterior pituitary spot. This mass is appearing heterogeneously hypo on T1, hyperintense on T2, showing blooming foci on SWI images and showing heterogeneous contrast enhancement. So this is a case of craniopharyngioma. Next case, this patient presented with proptosis. The CT angiogram reveals presence of dilated superior ophthalmic vein and presence of multiple tortuous channel in the left cavernous sinus. So a case of carotico-cavernous fistula. Another case where the child presented with recurrent infarct. These are the non-contrast CT images where you can see multiple gliotic areas in the cerebral parenchyma, typically in the watershed areas, in the frontoparietal and parieto-occipital region. The CT angiogram reveals typical narrowing of the supraclinoid ICA bilaterally with extensive collateralization in the region of circle of Willis, a case of Moyamoya syndrome. Here the differential will be Mela's disease, where the angiogram will be normal, but you'll find a lactate peak on spectroscopy. The classical case of bilateral basal ganglia and cortical classification, a case of Fowler's syndrome, or striatopaladodentate calcinosis secondary. A typical case of a colloid cyst, we are seeing a hyperdense lesion in the region of the third ventricle, which is non-enhancing. Two cases about calvaria lesion. Here you are seeing destruction of the left parietal bone with associated soft tissue mass showing enhancement, suggestive of a calvarial hemangioma. Another case where there is thickening of the calvarium and expansion with a ground glass matrix suggestive of fibrous dysplasia. Lastly, two interesting cases. Here you are again seeing a suprasellar mass, and you can very well appreciate the pituitary lying within the cella separately. This mass is iso-intense to gray matter on T2, T1 weighted images with no post-contrast enhancement. So these features are characteristic of hypothalamic hamartoma, where the patient present with a triad of precocious puberty, gelastic seizures. Last case, which we came across recently, this female presented with characteristic vertical gaze palsy. So the diagnosis here is easy. It is a case of progressive supranuclear palsy. As you can very well see here, there is atrophy of the midbrain. which you can appreciate by calculating the midbrain to pons ratio, which is less than 0.12 in this case. Normally it is 0.24, and there is flattening of the superior aspect of the midbrain, which you can very well appreciate in this midline sagittal images, producing the characteristic hummingbird signs. And on axial images also you can appreciate this midbrain atrophy, calculating the distance from the interpeduncular fossa to the intercollicular level at the level of superior colliculus. It is less than 12 mm. So with this, we come to the end of this spotter session. And we had a very great team of delegates who have answered most of the spotters very rightly. Thank you so much for your patient hearing. And if there are any questions, I would be happy to answer. Thank you, and sorry for the technical glitches.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kalpana Bansal, for showing a wide spectrum of cases. And thank you, Dr. Vineet Marwa. I think we are running behind schedule. Over to you, Dr. Salini. Dr. Salini Thapar, please.
Thank you, Dr. Marwa and Dr. Kalpana, for excellent sessions. I would request Dr. Shivani, President-elect Delhi IRIA, to confer the certificates of appreciation to our speakers for the day. Ma'am, please.
Good evening, everyone. This was a great session on the important topic of MR spectroscopy, and the classic neuroradiology spotters were recapitulated very well today. Thank you, Dr. Marwa, for having simplified the basic physics of MR spectroscopy and having told the residents and all of us the salient features for differentiating between the extraaxial, intraaxial, benign and malignant masses. Please, on behalf of Delhi chapter of IRIA, accept this token of appreciation. Dr. Surbhi.
Thanks, ma'am.
We thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kalpana Bansal, for having shown the classic spotters in neuroradiology that every resident is supposed to know and identify. It is my pleasure to confer upon you the certificate of appreciation on behalf of Delhi chapter of IRIA. Thank you, Dr. Kalpana Bansal.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the great learning opportunity. Thank you, Delhi IRIA.
Thank you, Dr. B.R. Goyal, sir, for having moderated the session so well. You are a valuable asset to the Delhi chapter as Vice President. Thanks a lot. Over to you, Dr. Surbhi. Please take over and conclude.
Ma'am, could you also confer the certificate of appreciation to Dr. Goyal for conducting the smooth session?
Thank you, Dr. Goyal. Please accept the certificate of appreciation on behalf of Delhi chapter of IRIA for having moderated this session. Thanks a lot, sir.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you so much.
So before ending the session, I would like to inform our delegates that next Saturday we would not be having the masterclass. That will be on the next Saturday. We'll be having the intervention CME. And then on the 31st, we'll have the next masterclass. That is interesting cases of abdominal radiology by Dr. Sapna. So please tune in every Saturday. There are very interesting sessions planned for you. So thank you all the delegates, the speakers and the panelists for the excellent and the successful session for today. And looking forward to a very enthusiastic participation for the next sessions. Thank you all.
Thank you and a very good day to everyone.
Thank you, ma'am.